I never knew that taking a trip to my local library could ever transport me to a place so bizarre. It was an ordinary Wednesday when I decided to return some overdue books. The library, an old, creaky building with ivy crawling up its sides, had always felt like a second home. But that day, something felt different the moment I stepped inside. The librarian, Mrs. Harrow, with her usual stern look, wasn't at her desk. Instead, there was an old leather-bound book open on the counter with a note, "Find your path." Puzzled, I shrugged it off as one of her quirky library events and proceeded to the return section. As I wandered deeper, the library seemed to stretch endlessly. The aisles grew narrower, the shelves taller, and the light dimmer. The familiar sections of fiction and history gave way to signs I'd never seen before: whispers of the lost, echoes of forgotten times, doors to other wares. Curiosity piqued, I ventured into Doors to Other Wares, thinking it a thematic collection. The books here didn't have titles, they had symbols. I picked one at random, and its cover felt oddly warm, and the symbol glowed faintly under my touch. When I opened it, the pages fluttered wildly, and a gust of wind seemed to pull at me. Before I could react, I was no longer in the library, but in a room with walls made of books, floor to ceiling, no door in sight. The air was thick with the musty scent of ancient paper. Each book on the shelves whispered as if it contained a living story. I touched another book, hoping to find a way out, but as I opened it, the room shifted. Now there were hallways branching out, each lined with endless bookshelves, under a ceiling that flickered like a stormy sky. I started to walk, and then run, through this labyrinth of literature. Each turn, each new room, had its own theme. One room was filled with books that screamed when opened, another with pages that wept ink. The stories within these books were alive. They did not like being read. They wanted to pull you into their world, or perhaps escape into yours. Hours or perhaps days passed. Time actually felt irrelevant. In one particularly eerie room, the books had mirrors for pages. In the reflection, I didn't see myself, but different versions of my life, playing out like movies where every decision I ever pondered was lived out in parallel universes. Exhausted and on the brink of despair, I stumbled into a room where the books were silent, their spines blank. In the center stood a pedestal with the same book I had first touched back in the library. This time, when I opened it, the symbol on the cover pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice, soft yet omnipresent, filled the room. To return, you must leave something behind. For every story taken, one must be given. Understanding finally dawned on me. I took out my journal from my bag, the one where I penned my thoughts, my own little stories, and placed it on the pedestal. The room spun, books flew around in a vortex, and then silence. I was back in my library, standing in front of the return desk, the normalcy almost jarring. Mrs. Harrow was there now, eyeing me with a knowing look. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, a slight smile playing on her lips. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I left, I couldn't help but glance back. The library looked the same, but I knew better. Beneath its quiet exterior lay worlds upon worlds, and I had left a piece of my story among them, forever woven into the fabric of that liminal space where books are not just read, but experienced. Back when I worked at this design and construction company, me and my coworker Linda worked on this rather odd project for a new bookstore. The client was enigmatic, insisting on anonymity, but their vision was clear: a labyrinthine bookstore where every room led to another, each filled with books from floor to ceiling, but with an eerie twist. They wanted the design to evoke a sense of endlessness, like one could get lost forever in literature. The project started normally enough. We designed narrow, winding corridors that opened into unexpected reading nooks, each themed differently. One room was all in red velvet with dim, seductive lighting, another stark white with books only on shadows and light. This was a play on the concept of noir, but as we delved deeper into the blueprints, things got strange. Rooms started appearing on our plans that neither Linda nor I remembered designing. One day Linda came to me with a blueprint she found rolled up in her desk. "Do you remember drafting this?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. The room was circular, with books spiraling upwards into what seemed like infinity, with no visible exit except the way you came in. We shrugged it off as an oversight, or perhaps an overzealous intern's contribution. As construction progressed, workers began whispering about feeling watched or hearing whispers when no one else was around. But the real chill came when we first entered the completed section. The air felt heavier, the silence profound, like the books absorbed sound and perhaps secrets. One evening, working late, Linda and I decided to explore. We entered the red velvet room, where the air seemed thick with more than just dust. There was an allure to the place, a magnetic pull. Books here were of love, passion, and darker, more hidden desires. As we moved from room to room, the themes grew more intense, the air more charged. Then we found the circular room from the blueprint. The moment we stepped in, the door shut behind us with a soft click, and the light dimmed to a twilight glow. The books around us seemed alive, their titles whispering temptations and warnings. Linda, always the braver one, reached out to touch a spine titled Eternal Desires. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, a soft sigh filled the room, and the walls seemed to pulse. Suddenly we weren't alone. Shadows moved where no light cast them, and the temperature dropped. A voice, sultry and smooth, spoke from all around. You've entered the heart of desire and knowledge. Not all who enter wish to leave, or are allowed to. We turned to leave, but the door was gone, replaced by more books. Panic set in, but so did a strange thrill. The voice continued, weaving tales from the books, stories of love that transcended time, of knowledge that bound souls to places. It was seductive in a way, this idea of losing oneself to an eternal story, to passion, to the unknown depths of the mind's library. Linda, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination, whispered, "What if we're just characters in one of these books?" The thought was terrifying, yet intoxicating. What if our world was just another room in this endless bookstore? We spent what felt like hours, or perhaps even days, lost in stories, until suddenly the door reappeared. When we stumbled out, the real world felt less real, like a pale imitation of the vivid, terrifying beauty we experienced inside. After that, we never spoke of it again, at least not openly. But sometimes, at work, our eyes would meet and we'd share a knowing look. The bookstore opened, and people praised its unique, almost otherworldly atmosphere. But Linda and I knew its secret. The bookstore wasn't just a place for reading. It was a living, breathing entity, where every visit could be an eternal journey through desire, fear, and the endless corridors of the human soul. Back in college, I had to do this literature project freshman year. It was one of those assignments meant to broaden our horizons, or at least that's what Professor Aiden claimed. I chose to explore the theme of isolation in literature, and someone recommended I check out this obscure library off campus, said to house some rare texts that could be useful. The library was located in an old, almost forgotten part of town. It didn't look like much from the outside, just another brick building swallowed by time and ivy. But inside, it was a labyrinth. The moment I stepped in, the air felt different, heavier, as if each book exhaled its own story into the atmosphere. I was greeted by silence and the musty scent of old books. No librarian, no students, just rows upon rows of shelves stretching into dim, flickering lights. I began to wonder. Each room I entered was eerily similar yet different, with books from floor to ceiling, some rooms with tables, others with just a single chair or an old lamp. As I ventured deeper, the architecture started to defy logic. Hallways twisted at odd angles, and rooms looped back into each other in ways that made no spatial sense. I guess I should have been scared, but there was also this pull, an inexplicable curiosity driving me forward. Then, in one of these endless rooms, I met her. She was sitting in an ancient armchair, reading by candlelight, which was strange because I hadn't seen anyone enter, nor had I seen any candles before. Her presence was as anachronistic as the library itself. Her dress was something out of a Victorian novel, elegant yet out of place. "Lost?" she asked without looking up from her book, her voice a soft echo in the silent room. Sort of," I admitted, trying to mask my unease with casual conversation. "Doing research for a project." She finally looked up, her eyes a piercing gray. "This place has all the answers if you know how to look," she said, a slight smile playing on her lips. There was an allure to her, something that made the air between us almost electric. As we talked, the conversation twisted like the corridors around us. She spoke of books like lovers with a passion that was infectious. But there was an edge to her stories, tales of characters trapped by their own narratives, much like what we seemed to be doing in this endless library. The tension between us was palpable. It wasn't overt, but it was there, in the lingering looks, in the accidental brushes as we reached for the same book. It was in the way she leaned in when she whispered about forbidden texts. Yet, with each passing moment, the room seemed to close in. The book started whispering, or maybe it was the wind through cracks I couldn't see. I noticed the titles on the spines were changing, now bearing our names, our stories, intertwining. "Isn't it thrilling?" she breathed, close enough for me to feel her warmth in the cold room, to be part of a story. That's when fear truly gripped me for the first time. The realization hit that I might not just be studying literature, but becoming part of it. Her smile widened as if she could read my thoughts, her eyes now reflecting not just the candlelight, but something darker, something more consuming. I don't remember leaving, but I found myself outside, clutching a book I didn't recall picking up. Its title? The Unending Tale. Back at my dorm, I opened it to find the story was blank, except for one sentence. The reader becomes the read, the lover becomes the tale, and in the library of liminal spaces, every exit leads deeper within. To this day, I feel her gaze in every library, every quiet room filled with books, and I wonder if I ever truly left. Or does some part of me remain there, in that liminal space, eternally entwined in a narrative with no end? I used to go to this bookstore that had a coffee shop inside it in college. It was usually a nice place to study, but every so often there would be this one rather obnoxious girl named Amanda that would completely throw off my vibe. Amanda was loud, always laughing too loudly or arguing with someone over the phone. Despite this, I couldn't help but notice the way she moved, with a confidence that bordered on seductive even, her eyes always seeming to catch mine for a second longer than necessary. One late evening, as finals were approaching, the bookstore was unusually empty. Even Amanda wasn't around, which was odd but relieving. I decided to explore some of the less visited sections, the ones at the back where the light flickered and the air felt heavier. That's where I found the door. It was unremarkable, easy to miss, but something about it called to me. Pushing it open, I stepped into what I thought was another part of the store. Instead, I found myself in a vast, endless library. The shelves stretched high above, lost in shadows, and the aisles seemed to twist and turn into infinity. The air was musty with the scent of old paper, and there was a silence so deep it felt alive. As I wandered, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. The books here were strange, their titles in languages I didn't recognize, some not even resembling any known script. I picked one up. Its cover felt oddly warm, like skin almost. Opening it, the pages were filled with shifting text, stories that seemed to adapt, becoming more personal, more about desires and fears I hadn't even admitted to myself. That's when I heard her. Amanda's unmistakable laugh echoed softly from somewhere within this labyrinth of literature. Following the sound, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and that inexplicable attraction, I turned a corner to find her, or at least a version of her. She was different here, somehow. Her eyes were too bright, and her smile too knowing. "Funny meeting you here," she said, her voice echoing in a way that seemed to resonate within the books themselves. What is this place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A place between places," Amanda replied, stepping closer. "Where stories live, where every book is a doorway, and every reader, a potential character." The tension between us was palpable, charged with something more than just physical attraction. It was as if the books themselves were weaving a narrative around us, pulling us into a story we couldn't control. She reached out, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me a book. "Read this," she whispered, her breath cold against my ear. The title was my name. Opening it, I saw my own life unfolding on the pages, but with paths untaken, desires unfulfilled, and fears yet to be faced. Then the atmosphere shifted. The library seemed to contract, the shelves moving closer, the books whispering now, pages fluttering like the wings of moths in the dim light. Amanda's demeanor changed too. Her playful arrogance turned to something urgent, almost fearful. "We need to leave," she said, grabbing my hand. But as we ran, the corridors twisted, the doorways led back to where we started, or to entirely new sections filled with increasingly bizarre and grotesque tomes. The tension that had been a mere undercurrent now felt like a trap, a lure in this unending maze designed to keep us lost, forever reading, forever desiring an escape or each other, whichever came first. Finally, with Amanda's grip tightening, almost painfully, we found the door out. Bursting through, we were back in the familiar, quiet bookstore, the normal world jarring in its silence. Neither of us ever spoke of what happened. Amanda stopped coming to the bookstore, and I couldn't look at a book the same way again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear the pages whispering, inviting me back to that liminal space, where every story, including mine, is still being written.